through.
Yeah, earlier today we saw the two teams in Theater of Pain opt to go for different routes. One went for the Ghost Quarter, one went for the Gorchop Quarter, and then they ended up finishing off on the same of the quarters. I don't know why they call them quarters when there's 3 of them, but I digress. And it didn't really end up making that much of a difference. The only difference was prideful timings, because you usually get about 60% in those 2 sections of the dungeon. I'm interested to see if we're going to see similar routing from these 2 teams, if they opt for one of those 2/3, or if they go for the Duelist Quarter first here. I'm interested to see.
Yeah, so we see both teams starting pulling all of that trash on top of the first boss and committing that Bloodlust as well. We do see a slight difference in comp. Gargoyle Stream having a Hunter in their comp, while Piami is running that Unholy DK on their side. So pros and cons for that, right? You have an extra melee, which can cause some issues here or there. A lot of melee unfriendly dungeons. But the Hunter does have a lot less AoE burst and also less single target burst compared to the Unholy when he's got those cooldowns ready.
Yeah, for sure. And if I'm not mistaken, wasn't does Gargoyle Stream in the first matchup today in Theater of Pain? I believe they were. Yeah, it was against against Echo, and Echo just kind of mopped the floor with them. But playing the same comp, but just doing more damage overall. So we haven't seen Unholy DK yet in this dungeon today, and I'm interested to see if that actually ends up making a difference. It is actually doing just about the same amount of damage on this boss as the Hunter, so I'm not really sure what the option was there for them, because I mean, we know Mini also plays the Hunter, and it seemed to work out pretty well for Echo earlier today.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing to note that I do believe that the last time Gargoyle Stream was not playing a Necrolord at all. So in this dungeon, if you have a Necrolord, you can basically click on those banners and you get a versatility buff and a movement speed buff, which is nice, but I wouldn't say it's one of the better Covenant buffs that you can get in dungeons. So interesting to see that Gargoyle Stream last time just chose to not have any Necrolords to get this buff at all. They were thinking that the Necrolord would cost them so much that it's not worth it in return to get this the versatility buff. But Piami having the DK have no issues running that Necrolord, right?
Well, remind me because I don't actually remember off the top of my head. I'm not a Necrolord player. I'm a Night Fae. Is the Necrolord buff 10% flat versatility, or is it 10% increased versatility on top of what you already have? Because if it's just the increased versatility, then that's pretty minimal for just about everyone in the group except for maybe the Windwalker Monk and the tank, right?
Yeah, I'm not actually sure about that one either. I'm sure Dred knows or Titles knows and can tell us eventually once they figured it out for us. But yeah, I don't think it's as big of a, it's really not that big of an increase, which, as you mentioned though, for the Windwalker, because they do go for versatility, right? So for the Windwalker, it might be good, but for the rest, maybe not as much. But I still think just having the Necrolord on the Disc Priest, because Moat is running Kyrian, right? And it's interesting to see that not even the Disc Priest is going for that Necrolord, because yes, if you don't run Kyrian, you do lose out on that extra damage, but he's not running Night Fae, which you usually see in the MDI and the Disc Priest to reduce other damage dealers' offensive ability cooldown. So interesting to see the choice for Gargoyle Stream, while Piami chose to run the Necrolord after all. We will see later on when it comes to the damage. And I mean, comparing Gargoyle Stream to Echo earlier, they had the same route, but were just slower. So maybe it really was the difference in just having the buff or not having it.
True, and we were talking about those potentially different routes here, but it looks like both teams are opting to go for pretty much the exact same route. You can see they're dealing with this Prideful at the exact same trash percentage, and they just went for the same boss first. They're going for Gorchop first. So right now, it's really easy to determine which team is in the lead. Wow, all of those Gargoyle Stream dropping incredibly low at the end of that Prideful mob there, but they are still alive and they have that buff ticking on them, so Mode will be able to top everyone off easily with that mana bar. But Dr. J's team, Piami, going for a massive pull down here in the bottom of this wing, pulling literally every single trash mob on top of this middle area, and it looks like they're going to be able to burst it all down, but they're not out of the woods yet with those 2 Sludge Spears still jumping around. Any of those Withering Discharges go off, they're going to be in for a rough time.
Yeah, that's actually an insane pull, as you mentioned. Igloo dropping incredibly low, did manage to recover himself, though, as they still have those Stitchworks alive. They're just kiting them back and forth. We see Rentari go down, though. They did have a Battle Rush to get him back up, so they might be able to kite this out. Dr. J having aggro, needing to use the Ice Block, though, to survive. And Cauterize proccing as well. Mini going down, they don't have any Battle Rush anymore, but they should be able to kite this out, but they're still pretty high HP, to be honest. And those butchers, they have a lot of HP, so not having the rest here for Mini, this might mean this is going to take quite a long time for them to finish off.
Yeah, I mean, they went for it, but it's not really going to work out for them that well. Now, after, they will be able to finish it off, but it's just costing them so much time. You can see that Does Gargoyle Stream is already on their way to the boss. I believe they're pulling those last 2 trash mobs with the boss, so they're not skipping them, but they're going to get that easy cleave down with their comp. And man, I mean, if that pull did work out for them, it would have put them in the lead, but I feel like this is just the story of PIME in pretty much every single dungeon we've seen them today. They go for these massive pulls, which if they did work out for them would look really phenomenal and would put them ahead, but I don't think it's actually worked out for them a single time today.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think sometimes they're just taking too many risks on their side. And this time, we see Krona actually managed to blink through the wall this time. I remember the last time on this very moment, unfortunately, Krona did get hit by that wall, which cost him a little bit of damage because he was getting dragged out of his rune. But this time did manage to blink in time, as PIME did now manage to get Mini back up as well, and they're just now engaging the boss. But yeah, this is a pretty big time loss for them, considering that I assume they wanted to pull those high HP mobs into the boss at the very end, but they couldn't because Mini was dead, and they didn't have a battle rest, right? So they had to finish off those mobs with only 2 damage dealers alive, and then just out of combat rest the DK back up. Now, if their strategy would have worked the way they wanted to, then it probably would have just dragged those remaining mobs into the boss and just finish it off with Gourd Chop, which would have been a really huge time save. But yeah, sometimes taking those risks, if it doesn't work out, you lose a lot more time than what you would have saved by doing it properly.
Yep, and even so, with that extra death on the board and that huge mishap with Mini going down and not really being able to deal with the rest of that trash, I mean, PIB is only 20% behind on this boss. It could be a lot worse based off of how much of a mistake that pull was for them. So they're definitely not, completely out of this dungeon just yet. There's still 2 entire wings left to go. So a lot left for them to make up some ground in. But I mean, even then, Corona really didn't use the second combust on that boss. You can see he did less overall damage there than their tank did. So he better be saving that combust for something huge here. Otherwise, I feel like that was kind of a weird choice to make.
Yeah, I agree. It looks like they're using some Invis potions here to go past these shackled souls. These shackled souls can be incredibly dangerous because they start casting on random players, and if you get targeted by multiple of them, it just does an insane amount of damage. If you can interrupt it, right? You can use your AoE interrupts, AoE stuns to interrupt the cast, but it's still very dangerous on a fortified setting, so they just choose to completely skip it. I think we saw Echo actually pull some of these shackled souls into the boss fight later, right? If I'm not mistaken. So maybe that is something that Gargoyle Stream also wants to do.
Right, I believe Robin was tagging them with Throglaive, and then they snapped up to the boss, and they could just cleave them down for a little bit of extra free mob count. Something you typically don't see in live keys. Usually in live keys, you see teams pull as many of the mages in this section of the dungeon as much as possible because they have very little HP, and they have a purgeable buff that's actually a massive shield the mage can dispel. Each one of those shields is probably something like 25k of a shield that lasts for 2 minutes, so they're pretty much invulnerable for this section of the dungeon. But because this is the MDI, you want to go for the fastest way to get at mob count, and pulling 2 mages at a time is not the way to do that.
Yeah, definitely not. And we see PIME now skipped that 40% pride that they just spawned by using their Shadow Melts. And now they're dealing with this single mini boss here, which does a huge amount of damage with his Soul Storm that he channels. So, interesting choice to see them just deal with this by himself. It's high HP mobs, so it takes a long time. And usually we see those MDI teams trying to avoid these kind of mini bosses as much as they possibly can, or at least try to pull other things on top of it to make it more efficient, right? But standing still, just dealing with one single mob without anything else is just a pretty big time loss. But the only thing they could have pulled on top was the Pride mob. And you can't really play, I mean, you can, but it's going to be incredibly difficult to deal with the Soul Storm plus the Pride mob AoE at the same time. And that's Gargoyle Stream doing a pretty big pull here on their side.
Yeah, I mean, they're pulling two of those mages into this pull, which is probably where we're going to get their extra count from skipping all of those souls that we talked about earlier. And you can see the pull just kind of melts, and the mage takes completely zero damage because he had two of those shields on top of him. Usually that soulstorm will do a lot of damage, especially to, your more less tanky members like the mage. But yeah, really nice use of the dungeons and mechanics in order to not take any damage there.
Yeah, well done, definitely. So now move on. One thing about this dungeon specifically is that there's quite a lot of single target damage required, even if it is 45, but the bosses have a lot of HP, and you have all of these like mini bosses and this soul forged bone weaver that you have to kill. So that's why we see some of those damage healers opt to take more of a like single target build, just to have just to be able to deal with all of those mini bosses that are in here. Also later on in different wings we see some of the mini bosses that you literally just can't skip, so you just have to deal with those.
Yeah, and seeing PIME deal with this particular prideful mob, it seems like they want to use this prideful buff to maybe pull all of the trash on the next platform, because the next platform we're seeing does Gargoyle Stream deal with it right now. It's not necessarily that difficult or dangerous to deal with. You just have to make sure you're getting those bone spikes, I believe, from the mages, and as long as you interrupt those, there's not that much damage that goes out on the group. So I'm surprised they didn't decide to try to just instantly click the portal before they got in combat with the Pride and then shadow mode the aggro off when they get to the next platform so it doesn't port to them. Instead, they're just opting to deal with this for a buff for a platform that I don't think they need it for.
Yeah, it's really taken them a long time to finish off this Pride here, but now let's see what they're actually going to be doing. I mean, we saw Gargoyle Stream deal with it really well without the Pride, as you mentioned. They basically just dragged it to the right side first, and the Bone Reaver has the most HP. So once the right pack was dead, they pulled it over to the left pack. But PIME is just pulling all of the packs on top of the Bone Reaver here, which it is enabled. Like, the reason why they can do this is because they do have this Pride buff, and it just makes it so fast. And I mean, it looks like it was worth it because it really just melted for PIME here.
Never mind, that was way faster. That was way faster, man. Okay, well, Dr. J making me eat my words literally instantly, and they definitely made up a ton of time there by dealing with that pack the way they did. Yeah, like you mentioned, pulling both two packs of mages on top of the boss instead of going to them one at a time, getting all of their cooldowns on top of them. Yeah, that was beautiful, and that was another one of those situations we've been talking about where PIME has these awesome pulls that they've set up and probably practiced, but it just hasn't worked out for them that often today in the MDI. And I mean, there's one that worked out for them. It looks great when they actually are able to put it together.
Yeah, when it works out, it looks so easy, right? They just pull everything together, AoE it down, perfect, right? But so many things can go wrong when they do those huge pulls. So well done by PIME to get it done this time around. But Death Gargoyle Stream are still ahead. They are fighting Kultharok at this point. This boss can be decently difficult. It does a lot of AoE damage with those two magic debuffs that get applied to the group, and also that draws soul, that draws out your soul. As long as you manage to go into these hands, though, your soul is being gripped and you can immediately pick it up again. And we also have a Disc Priest who does have Master Spell, so you can get rid of both of the magic debuffs that actually get applied here whenever Master Spell is ready. So it makes it a little bit easier for the priest to heal.
Yeah, I believe they can get every other one with the Master Spell, so every other one of those debuffs they just have to heal through one of them, so it's not that big of a deal, especially with the priest. And they just have, I mean, I'm sure they're not playing priest for that particular reason. It's just a happy coincidence that they happen to have both Power Infusion, Fey Guardians, and Master Spell all at the same time. But yeah, you can see how much of a gap PIME has closed here. They're already within 35% on the boss, and they were way further behind that based off of where they were on Gorechop. So they're definitely making up time in this dungeon, specifically with how they dealt with that Bone Reaver pack. Very impressive. And if they have something like that for the next Duelist swing, they're in a good situation to pretty much take control of this dungeon. Not to mention also the fact that they are 9% ahead on the trash count. So they're going to be opting to skip some trash in the Duelist swing, and I'm kind of interested to see what it is that they do end up skipping.
Yeah, I mean, they might actually be ahead even compared to Dusk Gargoyle Stream, because the amount of trash they can skip later on might actually make up for the time they're behind in dungeon speed right now. So very interesting to see what they're going to be doing or what exactly they're going to be skipping, as the Dusk Gargoyle Stream are now back into this middle area. They're going to go into the next wing. They had to skip those ads that they skipped earlier as well with those invis potions, and now they're in this swing where there's a lot of mini bosses basically that you have to deal with, which can cause some issues and just a little bit slower. And let's see how much damage they can pull up here for these mini bosses to make sure they finish them as fast as they can.
Yeah, and of course we talked about this earlier today, but the mini bosses are set in the tournament realm. They will always get the same ones for competitive integrity, so there's no RNG where, one of the teams will get the interrupt mob, forcing all their casters to stop doing damage, and the other one won't. So they'll have to deal with the exact same mobs just to make sure it's fair. But yeah, the duelist quarter here is a pretty long, slow single target quarter, right? You have to deal with 3 of these mini boss ads, not to mention the 2 pridefuls that both teams still have left to deal with. So there's a lot of single target damage, which is why you were mentioning earlier that these players are generally going to be spec'd into more single target damage in this section of the dungeon. But they are setting up right now to pull a pride away from where they're headed so that they can shadow meld it off when they head to the second of these major duelists.
Yeah, and it looks like they're also just spawning that pride mob in the back there. They were all stacking up, making sure it spawns there so they can shadow melt off the aggro now. Don't want to deal with this pride mob at all. There's enough single target fights they have to do, so they figured we don't want to have an extra single target mob to deal with. We're just moving on, not wanting that pride buff at all. While Piami also now down the boss, and they're in the same area. Well, they are in the previous area where they fight with this first mini boss that they have to deal with. But again, there's a difference in percentage. Piami is slightly ahead. This is still head-to-head, though. This is so incredibly close between those 2 teams. It really is going to come to the last 2 bosses and how fast they can deal with those, and how fast they can deal with this trash too. This next pack in particular has this the Ancient Captain, who does apply AoE damage aura reduction to all the mobs around it. Looks like they're just taunting it away, so they don't have to deal with this aura at all.
Yeah, this looks like another scenario where the priest could maybe run Dominant Mind and take control of the captain, because he does apply that damage reduction to your group. Or you could also just kill it off with the Arbalest and the conscripts. I've seen a lot of priests go for that strategy in this dungeon as well. So something to think of for the future. Maybe some teams can figure something out with that. Would be cool to see. But yeah, this trash pack is usually pretty dangerous. And actually, I'm just very dumb because you can't control it. Anyways, moving on. I think it has to be actually a DK who does it, but still. Which there is a DK on the side of Piami.
Side. Maybe they are going to be controlling it since they are undead, right? So yeah, control undead is definitely something that we might be seeing on Piami's side.
But here's something interesting that's about to happen right now, which we do know will happen, and I'm not making this up, is that they will get their 100% trash count from this final duelist mob on the side of Piami. That should be the rest of their count. So it looks like once this is dead, they're going to be moving through the rest of the dungeon, shadow melding off the final prideful, and getting on their way to the third boss, while Does Gargoyle's stream still has to deal with the rest of this mini-boss. It looks like Piami is just ahead in the dungeon now.
Yes, they definitely are. So they're just going to be gathering up all of these trash, just running through and shadow melting off. We see Rentari is just going to be off-tanking this mini-boss for a second, and Igloo grips him right as they're ready to shadow melt. And there we go. Now they only have 2 bosses left while not having to deal with any trash anymore. So now it is Piami who is ahead in this game against that Gargoyle stream. So let's look at Piami and see how they deal with this boss. This boss can be dangerous if you don't have enough damage to deal with this oppressive banner, because the boss jumps into the middle and starts casting 3 of those abilities that basically just one-shot you if you get hit by them. It's usually not that hard to dodge it, but the oppressive banner applies a slow to your whole group, and then it's incredibly hard to dodge if you don't have any sort of blink effects.
And now it's time for my favorite section of the entire dungeon, where 2 of the players are forced into brutal PvP combat. Wait, what? Why isn't Clicks fighting back? What's going on?
I cannot explain why this is happening at all. He must be like giving up because he's so scared of Mini's damage that he just gave up. He was just too afraid, I think.
True. Or it could be that he wanted the damage buff on Mini with Army of the Dead and Bloodlust so they can burst this boss down. Look at that boss's HP go. No, it's not that. You're right. I think Clicks may be DC'd. Maybe getting pulled down by the chains DC'd him.
But we also saw Igloo actually using that PI as well. So what happened was that they got pulled into the arena. Of course, they said, "Oh, Clicks just went down." Yeah, that was very unfortunate. you know what? I think they were calling to ignore the oppressive banner. And it looks like that's why Clicks went down there, because he didn't manage to dodge one of those casts. But yeah, what happened was that Clicks and Mini got pulled into the arena. They decided, well, Mini has all the cooldowns ready, so he's going to be the one.
This is Giga Brain. No, Clicks died right away. It might not have been on purpose. It might have been a complete mistake, but he's a monk. He could Tiger's Lust himself if he needed to. If you die right away there, you can actually have him go up early, start the RP for the boss about 10 to 15 seconds early, and the 5-second death timer is made up and more because of that. I'm just going to go ahead and say it wasn't on purpose, because Clicks is an insane player.
I agree. No, I definitely think that was the reason why, because there's quite a long RP event at the very end here. So once you go up to this room, you have to sit there AFK and can't really do anything, because there's no more trash here either. So the time that you have to wait for more Dratha here to spawn is completely a waste of time. So you're totally correct, Zyra. I think Clicks died on purpose, so he can just trigger this event. He probably didn't have any offensive cooldowns ready and said, you know what, I'm not going to be doing a lot of damage anyway. I'm just going to go down here and trigger this event, while the rest of the team was just finishing off the boss. So very well done by them, as they just, I mean, they were behind, or it looked like they were behind for most of this dungeon, and then all of a sudden they just had this huge pull that worked out for them after the initial mistake they did with this with the other big pull. They just made up all of this time now. So incredibly well done by PME.
And I would say they're not out of the woods yet, but they're so far ahead on this boss that I don't think there's any chance Does Gargoyle Extreme can come back in this dungeon, unless somehow PME decides to get hit or run over by a bunch of these boars in this final phase. Does Gargoyle Stream still does have the Bloodlust available, and that was yet another Giga Brain play coming from Does Gargoyle Stream. Did you see that? The altered time from Krona into going upstairs to finish the RP. Kids steal for time to come back down to finish the group, finish off the Prideful. The RP's already started. That's insane, but unfortunately, it's not going to be anywhere close to enough, as PME now has Mordretha down below 10%. And even with some early mistakes on those big pulls, they're able to put it all together, finish the dungeon off strongly, and take a 1-0 lead in this series.
That's right, PME taking the win onto that one, and just kind of seems like it is the trend continuing, where they're okay having these greater risks, they're okay having a couple more deaths than some of their opponents, because they're just putting on so many big pulls, and when they pay off, that's going to be the victory for them, Tettles.
Yeah, I mean, the Gore Chop Wing was definitely where we did see that, where their ability to big pull kind of came back to bite them a little bit. Beyond that, the dungeon was like, it felt pretty standard to me. There wasn't like a ton that was like, oh man, this is the most insane pull I've ever seen. How could they have possibly have done this? It did feel like they were just like pulling with a little bit higher tempo than does Gargoyle Stream. And that was the way that they were able to continue up their swift pace. Plus, I felt like their Gore Chop Wing, while it was not clean, I would generally say it was like a better routing decision just as a whole. And they did get kind of punished for it because it's a lot of tank damage, but it's still faster. So sometimes you have to go for it.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a lot of times just extra stress being put onto the healer or to the tank to be able to pull some of these actions really together all at once. And, you know, PME is kind of looking a little bit more back in form from what we were talking about earlier there, Zyra, where we wanted to really see from them. Well,
yeah, I mean, they did still have one of those major pulls that was somehow completely borked at the start of the dungeon, but at least they stayed alive and finished it off and it wasn't a complete disaster. And I think that's what the difference was this dungeon. They were able to pull themselves back together after making that mistake and finish off the dungeon strongly enough to where they still had a pretty commanding lead over Does Gargoyle Stream.
Yep, and you know, again, we're looking at the experience that some of the old guard is kind of bringing to the table versus what some of these newer teams are looking at as well. And, you know, I think in a lot of respects that when the day starts going longer and longer in Agura, you start looking at some of these teams who have so much experience. I mean, we just saw, for example, Obey Alliance continuing on throughout the bracket, looking a lot better. And these longer days start to kind of catch up with some of these newer teams, I feel.
Yeah, and not to mention the fact that these EU teams it's 2 a.m. here. So that's also something that you have to consider, right? It's really late. Some of these teams have been playing all day already, preparing for these matches. They've been playing series after series, especially in the lower bracket here, making sure they're preparing for all of their opponents. And it might be showing here and there, making some mistakes. But to be fair, both those teams still played incredibly well. So I'm excited for this next game. We did see PIME make some mistakes earlier when they played this. They do have a really fast time trials time, though, compared to Gargoyle stream. It's a 2-minute difference in time trial time. But if PIME makes those mistakes, as we've seen them do before, if they do any of these crazy pulls again, then it really can go either way.
Yeah, let's start talking about some of the crazy pulls, titles that we had, especially in Gore Shop swing here between these teams.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the first thing that we have to analyze here is just this pull is actually wild. So this pull with all of these small mobs is normally pretty scary. The gas bag plus all the small mobs is really scary. But then you add in the 2 mobs that are at the end hallway on top of it, and that just is an immense amount of tank damage. You see, actually, right as Rentarius Metamorphosis falls, he immediately dies. Like, he doesn't even have a second to be able to react before he ends up getting pelted to death by all his mobs. Jay does a good job of kiting. They're able to recover. This puts Gargoyle ahead a lot in this dungeon, and Gargoyle is kind of making moves here with the Portal Guardians, the Soul Binders.
I love this pull as well. You know, they were talking over it of just how much preparation, how little anybody's health pool moved on that one with Barrier and Rapture and everything being utilized. That's one of the, sorry to come over you on it, but it's one of the more difficult pulls that Disc Priests really have to deal with. And that just got me like crazy excited when I saw that one.
It's very difficult to explain all the times like how horrifying all of these pulls are and how much preparation and practice time really goes into them. But there's a reason that you don't do these on live realms. There's a reason that you wouldn't even take the time to practice being able to do something like that on a live realm. And the MDI teams make the most difficult pulls look seamless. And those were, even the one that started to go wrong for PIME, they recovered it. And that was a huge time save. So.
Yeah, and it's one of the very interesting things with playing with priest healers as well is, just before the, was it the soul caster? Soul storming mob and everything like that. Just before then, they were dealing with Prideful coming up. And nobody was using any of their cooldowns. It got to the full 20 stacks. You see Boot of the Ascended get expended and everything like that. And just damage is super low in general. So leans on one cooldown. He still brings his Rapture and Barrier and everything that he has left. I think he uses Pain Suppression as well and the pull to follow, and just how much extra stress kind of gets put onto the back of the healer to get the job done. It's cool to see.
It's like that meme. It's like healers hate him, and it's like a picture of the Pride. DPS never use their cooldowns and let this idiot get to 20 stacks.
That's right. Sorry, the Portal Guardian is the name of them. Let's check out our next map, though.
Guardian, yeah.
Yeah, we got our Halls of Atonement going to be coming up as well. So, once again, time trial dungeons coming up, Nagura, to see how well these teams are performing, like you were mentioning.
Yeah, so I don't think we have seen Gargoyle stream, at least not on a tournament for Halls of Atonement. They did have the number 9 seed only for the time trials, 17 minutes, 29 seconds, compared to PIME, who had the number 3 seed on the time trials with 15 minutes and 29 seconds. Now, it's definitely possible that does Gargoyle stream improve their strat, right? Because we've seen teams play this dungeon yesterday already on stream with a really fast strategy, really fast time. So it's very possible that Gargoyle stream saw some other teams playing this dungeon and somehow adjusted their strategy to be faster.
We'll have to see what they got in store as they're facing elimination right now. PIME up 1 against Does Gargoyle stream.
All right, well, let's see what they got in store for us for this Gargoyle stream. PIME, they already played this dungeon earlier. I don't think they would change their strategy too much. The last time, though, they did have a full team wipe on one of their pulls, and they're playing Guardian Druid as well. So that is something interesting that we're going to be seeing here out of PIME, having that Guardian Druid. I think specifically for this legendary, because we have Necrotic as an affix, which can be incredibly dangerous for the tank, but the Guardian Legendary actually ignores the Necrotic buff, as far as I'm aware, with the Thrash Absorb, basically. So that's the reason why we see the Guardian Druid here to counter the necrotic affix.
Yep, for sure. Not to mention that even with that legendary, the bears can kind of pump out a lot of damage, surprisingly enough.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the biggest problems people have with the bear tank as well, is that they just usually don't pump out enough damage, but they definitely do with that particular legendary. And both teams gearing up here for a massive pull at the start of the dungeon, pulling all of the trash on the right side of the dungeon into this first shard of Halkias. And then, wow, I like this strategy from Gargoyle Stream, using the Ring of Peace to make sure these mobs can't really get out and do too much damage to the group, letting their tank kite a bit to reset his necrotic stacks. Very strong strategy from them. But it looks like the trash pull is going to go a little bit cleaner for PIME, with the massive damage coming out from the mages for both teams.
Yep, looks like they're also dealing with the Pride mob for both of the teams. We've seen a lot of Pride skips in this dungeon specifically. A lot of teams chose to just completely skip the Prides, not having to deal with those at all. They don't need the buff. But it looks like both Gargoyle Stream and PIME are dealing with this first initial Pride mob at least. We also saw them mind control one of the gargoyles as well. You need to be Venthyr for that one, so that's why we see the DK on PIME's side who's Venthyr, and I'm not sure which of the players is Venthyr on the other team, but they definitely do have one because the gargoyles are very valuable to mind control.
Yep, for sure. If I had to guess, it's probably the priest playing Venthyr because they lose the least from it. And here we go, Rentari gearing up for another large pull here. Are they pulling together both shards, or do they just skip that final shard? I'm not quite sure here, but you see it coming in on the screen here.
There it is.
2 shards of Halkias. Bloodlust is popped. They have the Prideful buff rolling. This is all of the damage in the game. And you see Dr. J doing 75k, now 85k DPS. Can he hit 100?
Where's the 100?
He does 100k DPS.
Wow.
Uncapped damage from the Fire Mage is absolutely
What is this, BFA?
ridiculous, man.
Unbelievable
This isn't BFA,
damage,
man,
wow.
but still absolutely unreal.
That's actually just absolutely crazy, the amount of damage coming out of that Fire Mage here. And the amount of trash they just pulled as well. Like, this was half the dungeon basically just pulled together. This is why they dealt with the first Pride mob, because it enabled them to do this insane pull, just dealing with so much trash all at once. And it looks like they're dealing with this Pride mob that they just spawned as well. So both of the teams dealing with the second Pride mob too, which probably means they're going to be doing another insane pull, because if you look at the combustion from the Fire Mages, they're back up. So they can just immediately do another insane pull like that. And we also have the PI available as well by both of the priests, so they can buff the Fire Mage's PI to give them even more AoE damage.
Yep, and here's that big pull. We saw Rentari actually die to this pull earlier today, so let's see if
Yeah.
they've made the proper adjustments to make sure they don't have that happen to them again. Line of sighting everything around this corner. This is all of the trash next to Halkias' room. And look at the Fire Mage start pumping here. This is, again, the power of the Fire Mage. And even the DK, only with the Dark Transformation, still doing a lot of damage and helping kind of residually cleave everything down. And yeah, everything's just going to die before the Manifestation of Pride is really active. This is just completely nuts. And you know what? I don't really want to like sort of... Oh, they still have their previous
Yeah, they still have the prideful buff from previously.
Rentari, by the way, had 69 stacks of necrotic. Nice.
Didn't care, yeah. So they actually went from 49% trash to 76% trash within this one single pull that they just did. Rentari dropping incredibly low, as he is out of defensive cooldowns, probably, that he had to use on this previous pack. We also see the Kyrian bond being activated here by Rentari. I think a big reason why he's playing Kyrian is for that vial, right? Because if you use the Kyrian vial, you can actually get rid of that necrotic debuff, so that will help them out, both with the tanks playing Kyrian, to make sure they can get rid of that necrotic once in a while. Even though Guardian, as we talked about earlier, has this legendary that makes him basically heal through the necrotic stack, or ignore the necrotic stacks rather, which definitely helps out a lot and enables some of those insanely huge pulls that PIME is doing. It's really nice to see that these teams are really playing around all of these kind of things, all of the legendaries of the different classes, all of the different covenants, because they know, okay, so this is necrotic, I can play Guardian Druid then, because I know that I can play this legendary. So it's just really, really cool to see.
And you can see they're pulling this boss over to this side of the room purely so they can grab another Loyal Stoneborn, so Mini can go ahead and mind control that for the group and pump out a lot of single target boss damage with it. That Stoneborn does so much single target damage for them as well. It's so strong. And everyone actually going to have to run through the laser beam, take a tick of it there, because they don't want to start moving over towards the patrol of 3 mobs. They don't want to get in combat with it because it's not part of the route. Pretty great movement from the group here. PIME is just crushing this dungeon, and this is the team that we were expecting to see from day one. This is the team that made us think they were one of the top 3 or 4 teams in the world last year. They're playing fantastic in this dungeon.
Yeah, they're definitely doing an incredibly good job. Do have to say though that this Gargoyle stream also playing really clean. They are on 0 deaths right now, and as I mentioned before, their time trial time was actually quite a bit slower compared to all of the other teams that qualified. They only got the number 9 seed in this specific dungeon during the time trials, so it looks like they definitely improved their strategy, because looking at the percentage, they are slightly ahead in percentage. It's just 1% difference though, and they are 40% behind in boss HP, which is quite a bit on a tyrannical environment, but definitely faster than they were in the time trial, so they also improved their strategy.
I mean, they are on a ridiculous pace here, even compared to the dungeon that ran earlier today. This could be up there with the times that we saw from both Echo and Perplex in the time trials, right around that 15-minute timer. So let's see just how perfect they can play here. And I really love how you can just see this Bear Druid is just making these pulls possible. At some point, any of those 3 massive pulls they did, Bear Druid would have to say, you know what, cooldowns are up, I gotta get out, I gotta start kiting. But the Bear Druid with the Thresh Legendary, able to pump those absorbs out, able to sit there, not worry about necrotic stacks, and just pump the absorbs, pump the healing, letting his Fire Mage and his Unholy DK pump out all the damage from those ground effects. Just perfect play so far from Rentari and the squad here in this dungeon.
Yeah, just incredibly well done. Also using the Curse Dispel to get rid of that stone debuff that Ekelon does cast on the group. So another damage increase, right? It is a tiny damage increase, but it still matters. You have the Curse Dispel by the Mage, and then you also have the Curse Dispel by the Druid. So you can dispel 2 damage dealers to make sure they're not getting stunned, and they can just continue to pump out the damage. So just slight advantage again of having that that Druid in the group. Now we do see this Gargoyle stream also down that boss, and they're now moving on to Ekelon as well. But yeah, it's just such a tiny difference in favor of PIME, because they're doing these insanely huge pulls and executing it so well. At this point, they either need to do some crazy pull themselves on their side, or we need to see a mistake by PIME. But so far, incredibly clean by them.
I mean, what other crazy pulls there left for them to do that? We know that PIME won't also do, right? We know that PIME likes to take all of the trash in the next 2 rooms into the 3rd boss as well, and we've seen them able to pull that one off too. So somehow, does Gargoyle Stream just find a way to pull 60% boss damage out of nowhere, or they need PIME to wipe, or it's a wrap and PIME is moving on to tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so awesome to see that both of those teams are playing so cleanly in this dungeon as well, because we've talked about this before, how the time trial dungeons are usually the dungeons where we see the most mistakes, really, even though they did practice those dungeons the most. But it also means that they're trying riskier strategies and doing bigger pulls, because that is the dungeon that they practice the most. So usually we see some huge mistakes here and there, but not for those teams today in this series. Both of them really want to stay in this tournament. PIME, if they win this, they're going to be moving on. And Gargoyle Stream really needs to win this game to stay in the tournament. And they're trying their hardest, but it's so hard to compete with PIME if they're just playing so clean and so well.
Yep, and if there's any place in the dungeon that they would be a mistake from PIME, it's going to be in this pull right now. It actually looks like they're kind of waiting a little bit to make sure that they have both PI and Combustion up for this pull, just sitting there for a few seconds, getting themselves composed and ready. Rentari pulling the first trash pack through into the second trash pack. They'll pull one of the Stoneborn from Mini to Mind Control and use on this pull as well. And into the 3rd boss we go. This is going to be it. If PIME can pull this off without a hitch, they are pretty much home free for the rest of the dungeon. There's not much left after this for them to make any mistakes on.
All right, let's see how it goes. Rentari up to 30 to 40 necrotic stacks already. We'll see, but you can see just how tanky Rentari is with this Thresh Legendary, right? He's not taking any sort of damage whatsoever. You can see the Absorb shield on his nameplate. You can see how big of an absorb he's got because of his Legendary. And even the Loyal Beast cast went through because of the Inspired mobs, right? You have Inspired here in this dungeon, and all of the trash is going down. Rentari tanking through the Loyal Beasts buffed Gargans plus all of the other trash and the boss. That is actually insane how well
is
done
that?
this was.
How is that fair? He had 61 stacks of Necrotic, 6 stacks of the Gargan Bleed, and his health is, yeah, I'm fine, I'm chilling, full absorb shield, no big deal, not taking any damage. I'm just a bear, by the way, just doing bear things, just doing bear pulls. It's absolutely nuts how strong this tank is for just doing ridiculous pulls. I'm actually kind of surprised that we don't see it in other dungeons. I think the control that the Vintage Demon Hunter brings for a lot of the trash packs in the form of the grip sigil and the silent sigil just helps way too much. And then of course also having a cheat death available for you is really strong. But why do you need a cheat death when you just stay alive as a bear druid, right? I mean, it's got to be just the necrotic that they take it for, since the Thresh Absorb kind of goes through that and ignores that. I think you can get away with the Vengeance in other places pretty easily, though.
I think so as well. I think the Vengeance is just giving you so much control, and on top of that, you also get the magic damage increase in your group, right? Which is just a pretty big damage increase, considering you have so much magic damage with the mage as well. So that might be a thing too. And on top of that, just being so incredibly mobile, jumping around left and right. We also always see like that Demon Hunter leap coming into place when you skip those Pride mobs as well, which might be a bigger issue as a druid. But yeah, just for this dungeon specifically, Guardian just doing so incredibly well.
Yep, for sure. And with High Adjudicator Elise going down, the only thing left between the next day, Championship Sunday, and PIME is going to be one single trash mob, and then the final boss. I think they're probably just going to get rid of the prideful buff by shadow melding it off, right? So 2 mobs left between them and moving on to the next day and guaranteeing themselves a spot in the top 4 of the first MDI after starting off, honestly, not so hot. I mean, we've been talking about this a lot, right? PIME, they're pretty much one of our veteran teams. Yeah, they've got 1 new DPS player on their squad, but they've been such a strong bastion of a strong team from Abracadabra 2 years ago to Deploy from Beyond last year. And seeing them start off so shaky was kind of jarring, right? They're such a strong team that we've had for a long time. But this is the team that we've been talking about. This is the team that's plays so well that they can compete with the top teams. And I just love to see them kind of pull it out here, and it makes tomorrow a lot more interesting if they're able to finish this off.
Yes, definitely. And to think that they almost lost a series earlier, almost actually got disqualified from the tournament early already, and now we're seeing them perform this incredibly well. I think this is really what they needed, though. Like, being so close to get eliminated earlier just really maybe gave them the motivation they needed to play this well in this series. And yeah, just as you said, just excited to see them play tomorrow. If they're going to be pulling out these strategies and also just pull them off without any sort of issues, they're just so nice to watch. So PIME, they're on the last boss already. They have the 100% trash they needed. They did skip that Pride, as we talked about earlier. They just shadow melted off the aggro. And now it looks like they still have Bloodlust available even, and not even needed to use that offensive cooldown for the previous pull. So they'll just be using it once they have their offensive cooldowns ready again. I assume they're waiting for, not sure exactly what they're waiting for, maybe for a potion cooldown, I'm not sure. But then they will be popping that Bloodlust and just melting this boss.
Looks like they're waiting for the Weapons of Order and Xuan coming up from the clicks here in about 20 seconds, and then they'll also have a dark transformation and an army that are coming up on top of that in about 20 seconds as well. So once those are all available, we can see the Bloodlust get popped. There it is. Cooldowns are going to be up in about 5 to 10 seconds, and they're going to be off to the races. And yes, I mean, Does Gargoyle Stream has clawed their way back here. They're only 30% behind on the boss, but you got to remember, it's a tyrannical boss, and the cooldowns are now coming up for PIME, and we're going to see Lord Chamberlain's health absolutely start melting here.
Yeah, I mean, it really just looks like PIME is going to be the winner of the series here, but I mean, I really just want to say how clean Gargoyle is playing as well in this dungeon specifically. They also have 0 deaths, and as I mentioned before, their time trial time was really slow. Like, they really improved their strategy for this dungeon specifically, so incredibly well done, just not good enough. If you play against a PIME that plays like that, then it's insanely difficult to win. So they tried their best, but it was just not good enough against such an incredible showing by PIME. Just incredible. As they finish off Lord Chamberlain, they just need 10% more to win and actually move on in this series.
Yeah, the gap on the boss was 30% when Does Gargoyle Stream pulled the boss. They are now 60% behind with that burst of damage with the Bloodlust and the cooldowns from PI And with Lord Chamberlain now dropping below 5%, that's going to be all she wrote. PI will take on this lower bracket quarterfinal match, going up 2-0 and moving their way into the top 4 for tomorrow's Championship Sunday.
That's right, PI survives this round of the lower bracket very convincingly, might we add, taking the win against Does Gargoyle Stream. The old guard holds on in this lower bracket and going to be moving on to the top 4 teams for tomorrow. Does Gargoyle Stream, of course, getting eliminated, but they did have a very impressive showing, and I'm really hoping to see them again, Tettles, in 2